Sebastian for the good introduction. As he said, I grew up in San Francisco, right in Chinatown, and we had an apartment that overlooked one of the streets there. And so one of my favorite things as a kid growing up was watching the lion dance, and we would always hear the drums and the firecrackers and everything, run to the window and just to see that. And so as I grew up, I always wanted to get involved with it, and finally had the opportunity when I moved down to San Diego. There was a group down there that was forming, or had already been formed, and so I joined that group, and that's where I got a lot of my training in the performance aspect. Performing is very different than actually crafting the lion, though, and it's something that not a lot of people get into. Most people just are interested in the performance aspect. They don't want to take the time to actually build these things. It takes a lot of time to do. But that was something that I was interested in, and so when I was in grad school, I had already moved up to LA, and I just decided I'd try my hand at building a lion, and that's how I got started. And the first attempt wasn't all that great, but after meeting with some people who knew what they were doing and could instruct me, I did an apprenticeship with Corey Chan, who is actually one of the people featured in the Celebration episode that Sebastian talked about. And he's actually traveled all over Asia with his team to study with some of the old masters there who are still building things by hand in the traditional way. And he was able to train me. I studied with him for about a year, and I still keep in touch with him, and we go over different techniques and things even now. So that's how I got started with this tradition. So what I'd like to do today is talk about the lion dance and start off with what it is and where it came from, how is it crafted, and also what is the significance of the performance, because that's something that a lot of people watching it don't really get into and don't understand what they're seeing. I have a professor where I work at Pepperdine University, and one of the professors there, when he found out I was doing a talk, he's like, well, what are you going to tell you? You just grab the thing and you go like this, and you say it for about 5 minutes and then you're done. I said, no, it's not like that. The tradition is really deeply rooted in the Chinese culture. This is the southern lion, and the first Chinese immigrants to the United States came from southern China, and they thought that this was such an important tradition that they brought it with them wherever they went. So they didn't bring everything with them, but they did bring this, and so that kind of highlights how important it was to them at the time. And so growing up in San Francisco, living in the apartment there, the first thing that we would hear is the sound of the firecrackers, and that would just alert us that some group is starting up. And so that's when we would run to the window and see, where's the smoke coming from, and we can go to that direction and see the performance. The second thing we would hear is the drums and the instruments starting up. And one thing that you may not know is that the drum represents the heartbeat of the lion. And so when you listen to the different rhythms of the drum, it can tell you a little bit about the performance. If the lion is moving slowly and more contemplative, the drum beat will slow down to match that. If it's at a high point in the dance, the drum beat will speed up, and you can kind of see the flow of the performance through the instruments. The lion dance essentially started as an exorcism ritual. And so one of the things that we say is that the lion brings a blessing and also chases away evil spirits and malevolent feelings and things like that. And that's also reflected in the gong and the cymbals. Those are Taoist instruments for exorcism. They say that the sound of bells and the clashing of cymbals scatter the spirits, and so that's another one of the elements that we use in the performance. One thing that's really important that I want you guys to know, though, is that it's not a dragon. Okay? There is a difference between the lion and the dragon. Honestly, how many people saw this and thought it was a dragon? All right, yeah. While we were here, there was even a family that was passing by, and the kids were like, whoa, look, there's dragons in there. So it's a very common misconception. But the dragon looks like this. I don't know if you guys can see it over there, but the dragons, similar to Western dragons, are reptilian. All right, so they've got scales and they're snake-like and they slither around. In Chinese culture, the dragons live in waterways, so rivers, lakes, things like that, and they control the weather. So they're very highly venerated. And lions look like this. Lions look like lions, right? They're quadruped animals. They're not reptilian. So when you transform that into the performance costumes, this is what they look like. And you can see the dragon there is much longer than the lion. It's held up by poles. And with the poles, you can sway the poles back and forth to represent the dragon slithering around. And the lions are, you can see they're quadruped animals, right? They've got the 4 legs, they've got the more round head, and their movements mimic the movements of a cat. So, very important distinction, and a very common mistake. So, of course, the lion dance tradition started in southern China, but they started out being viewed as heavenly guardians, or beings that came down from heaven to protect places. And so you'll see them on door knockers, you'll see them on stone statues in front of temples or businesses or things like that. Any area that you want guarded for any reason against any type of bad spirits. The reason that they were seen as heavenly guardians is there was an early emperor of China, and in the early feudal days, there were always border wars, right? Everybody's always attacking each other. There's always some war going on. And the emperor was really troubled by this specific battle that he was facing. And he had a dream one night that a fantastic mystical beast came down from heaven and defeated all his enemies. And so when he woke up and he told his people about that, they replicated the costume, or to the best of their ability, what they thought was the mystical beast. And so that's one way that we got the lion dance performance. Another one of the origin stories, of course these stories are all come from centuries ago, so we don't know the true origins, but another one of the origin stories is that there was a monster that would attack a village every year, and the monster would come and destroy the crops and do all kinds of bad, evil things that monsters do. And so the villagers wanted to get rid of the monster, and so they had to create a monster that was even bigger and badder than that monster. And so what they did was they got their a basket and they attached the tail to it and decorated it so it was really freaky looking. Got their pots and pans and whatever noisemakers they could, and when that monster came that year, they just jumped out at it, with this other creature, started making all this ruckus with whatever instruments they had, and frightened it away. And since then, that monster never returned to the village. And so every year, they recreated that in the performance of the lion. There's another story of a beast that was attacking the village, and in just a slightly different version, there was a Buddhist monk who happened to live in that village. And you can see the monk right here. Sometimes you'll see him in the performances around town too. And he's known as the big-headed Buddha. And so what he did was he actually tamed the beast by taking his red sash and tying it around the lion. You see there's a red ribbon on the horn of the lion. The horn is known as the lion's link to heaven. And so by tying the red ribbon around it, he was able to tame the beast. And then it became a helper for the village. And so that's just another one of the stories of how it got started. But you might wonder why this is called a lion. There's all kinds of mystical beasts in Chinese mythology. There's the Kailan, the Peihao, different things like that, but none of those words translate to any other real animal. Right? So why is this called a lion? During the Tang Dynasty, the Persians actually wanted to open up trade with China. It was a time of a lot of movement around the world, and people were starting to interact with other places. And so China had a lot of things that the rest of the world wanted, such as silk and spices and things like that. Marco Polo came and around the same time. But the Persian emperor wanted to open up trade, and so he sent the emperor of China a pair of 2 lions. Lions are not native to China, but they are in Africa, where the Persian Empire was. And so he sent this gift to the emperor, and the emperor thought it was great, and the people around thought it was great too. And so they created costumes to replicate the lion. Most people weren't able to go into the temple or the capital city and see the lions, and so they had performing troops imitate the lions, and they would go out to the villages. So that was in the northern part of China, and you see the northern lions actually look like lions, right? They've got a lot more of the fuzzy hair, they've got a mane around them, and they look like cats. But the southern part of China at the time was roughly the size of the United States. And the southern part was mostly the farmers and the peasants, and they didn't travel a whole lot. And so they didn't get the opportunity to know what these lions looked like. But they did have those beasts that I talked about that they had created. And so when they heard that there was this mystical beast in the capital, they just kind of figured, well, it must be the same thing as this. And so they called it the same thing. And that's why we get these called lions, even though they look nothing like a lion. Now, it started out as, like I said, an exorcism ritual or as a performance art, but during the last dynasty of China, the Qing dynasty, the Manchurians from north of China had actually invaded and taken over China, and so they were the government and they were in charge. They started out really not bad at all. They did a lot of art development and things like that, but as the dynasty went on and on, they became more and more corrupt. And they became more and more fearful that the ethnic Chinese were going to try and take back over the government. And so they started oppressing the people, and they started passing all kinds of rules and laws against the ethnic Chinese people. For example, the long braid, the long queue that you see Chinese men wearing, that was it was a requirement that all Chinese men had to wear that braid. It's not that they wanted to have that hairstyle. It's not that they wanted to, shave the top of the front of their head like that and look like that. They passed laws about what you could wear and how you could act and how many people could congregate at a certain time because they didn't want the Chinese people rebelling against them. Another thing that they did was that they stopped all martial arts because they didn't want the people learning how to fight. And so the Chinese started to resent that. And so they had to figure out ways of practicing their martial arts without openly practicing their martial arts, right? And so one of the things that they used was the Cantonese opera. And the Cantonese opera performance troupes could perform historical battles, or recreations of historical battles. And while they're doing that, they're training the actors in how to actually fight. You can talk about your battle plans if you're talking about a historical battle that happened, and you can spread the word for different things by using the costumes. You can hide people under the costumes and move them around the city and do different things like that. I want you to notice this guy's headdress. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, how elaborate it is. We'll talk about that in a little while. But one of the things that the Cantonese operas, one of the stories that they liked to do was called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And that's a historical Chinese novel. It'd be kind of like performing Shakespeare. So something that the people all knew about and could relate to. There were these basically it's a story of three Chinese generals. And at the time, China was divided and ruled by different warlords in different sections. China wasn't a united country. And so the three generals came together with the intention of uniting China into a single country. And so it was a very patriotic play. So when you see these three generals in their Cantonese opera, you see one's represented with a red face, one's represented with a black face, and one's represented with a lighter color face. And those three became the basis for some of the original Chinese lions. You can see there's the three, the red, the black, and the lighter faced one, who is Liu Bei, which is the first emperor of China. And so the original traditional Chinese southern lions all represent a specific general in that story. So there's another depiction of them. And like I mentioned, it was a way to train them in martial arts so that they could rebel against the Qing government. I'm going to talk a little bit about that more later on. Right now, I'm going to talk about the art of building the actual lions. As you can see over here, we've got the framework, and the framework is basically a bamboo structure, and it's tied together with paper ties. This is the traditional paper that we use to bind the bamboo together. You can see it's really thin paper. It's almost tissue paper, and it breaks really easily. I mean, you can just basically tear it like that. But you twist it up into these ties, and it's a lot stronger, and it actually is able to bind the framework together. And so you just take a little bit of wheat paste, which is a traditional way of binding things. Even bookbinders use wheat paste. It's a really traditional method. And you just twist it around the framework, and it holds it together. And then after you do the framework for me takes about, about 30 hours, 40 hours worth of work to do that. And after that, it's a paper mache. So we have thin, it's a different type of paper. Usually when you think of paper mache, you use the regular tissue paper, but the tissue paper is really thin. If we use that on the lions, you could actually just poke your finger through it. That's why you make piñatas with it, right? So they break easily and you get the candy inside. For lions, we don't want them to break, right? We want these things to last. So the paper that we use is a traditional paper called chouji, which is grass paper. And if you hold it up to the light, you can actually see a lot of fibers running through the paper, and the fibers are what strengthen the paper. So we paste on layer after layer after layer, so it's actually really thick. You can pretty much hit it and it won't break.
Usually, how many layers are you doing?
Quite a bit. On the very old lions, they probably weighed close to 40 or 50 pounds.
Wow.
And so the structure of the bamboo frame doesn't really weigh that much. It's maybe 3 to 5 pounds. So the rest of it is paper. The paint doesn't weigh too much.
And the wheat paste, right?
Yeah, the wheat paste and the rest of the decorations. But yeah, the traditional heads were very highly decorated and super heavy. It was actually a show of a group's strength that they could perform under the lion for a certain amount of time. And then another way of building up the army's strength is using these things, kind of like weight training. After that is the painting, and you can see on this head, there's a lot of different layering of paints, blending together of different colors. That's something that we're seeing not so much of anymore. On some of the modern lions, they try and take shortcuts. So rather than blending the two paints together, they'll just paint one stripe of red or one stripe of yellow and right next to each other. So one of the things that Corey learned from the traditional craftsmen was how to do this old style blending and kind of revive that. And so that's one of the things that I really liked about the old lions growing up too, is they just looked a lot more elaborate. And then the final step is the embellishing, is the adding on of all the different decorations and things like that. So this lion took me about a whole year. I didn't work on it full time, but my wife can tell you I worked way late into the night sometimes. Yeah, to get this done. Now, one of the things that people usually notice is the horn of the lion. And in Chinese, we call it the gai, or the top knot. In ancient Chinese tradition, the style of hair that you wore or the type of hat that you wore kind of signified your position in society. So kind of like you think of the Pope's got his big hat and you kind of know that he's the Pope because he's got this elaborate hat. The different government officials had different types of hats. And so that's kind of tied back into the Cantonese opera. When they wanted to portray different characters, they would portray them with different hats or different costumes, and then translate it again into the lion dance costume with different styles of horns. So this is the most common horn that you see is a bamboo shoot horn. You can see it kind of juts out like a shoot of bamboo. There's different styles, if you can see up here. So this is the fifth horn, and then there's other creatures that you can put up on top too. Since the horn is the lion's link to heaven, it's kind of his source of strength and his power. And so the different types of creatures that you have up there would give that lion different abilities or different strengths too. So this is like an eagle horn, would give it a lot of majesty and power. There's a phoenix horn. This one is a carp. Carps are symbols of fortune and good luck. And then this other creature in the middle is called an aoyu, which is a mythical creature that actually eats fire. And so one of the ways that it can protect a building, sometimes you'll see it on rooftops and things like that, is that it's protecting that building from fire. Another thing that you see, I'll show you on this one, are these two spirals next to the horn. And these are called, in Chinese, they're called top or pagodas. And what they represent is the Taoist alkalites had to wear their hairstyle in two coils like that. And so the lions, being related to Taoism, also have those on their heads. So you notice the eyes of the lion. The eyes, if you look at them, they always have black and white around them. And what that symbolizes is the black absorbs negative energy and the white reflects positive energy. And so the eyes of the lion are very important. Likewise, there's a mirror on the forehead, which also represents shining light into dark places. And there's also a legend in Asian culture that demons can't stand their own reflection. And so that's just another way of, being an exorcism type object. That's just another way of doing that. And finally, the pom-poms. If you remember, I asked you to remember that guy's headdress and with all the elaborate pom-poms on it. In the opera, the Chinese way of naming these pom-poms, I guess the best translation would be spheres of heroism. And so the more pom-poms you have, the more heroic the character portrayed. And so the traditional Chinese lions had lots and lots of pom-poms because we wanted our generals to be strong to be able to defeat their enemies. Nowadays, they're trying to cut weight on these things because who wants to perform with a 50-pound lion anymore? So a lot of the pom-poms are disappearing. A lot of lions just have the two by the sides of the nose now, or maybe a few scattered around. But when we go back to the old style, we like to do that the highly elaborate way. Now, even though this is just like a static costume, you can use the lion to show emotion. And that's one of the things that comes out in the performance. is the emotions of the lion. And so you can see by posturing the lion, you can show how it's sleepy, right? Or you can show that it's thinking about something or cautious. You can see the lion is pulled back a little bit with his foot is reaching out to touch something, but the posturing of the lion is drawn back a little bit. As opposed to this lion who's leaning forward, this lion is actually a little bit more aggressive and leaning into whatever object he's facing. He can show excitement, and he can show dominance or domineering. A lot of things. The lion is the king of beasts, even in Chinese culture. And so by shooting the head up and looking down at something, you're showing that you're over it, right? You're putting yourself above it. And there's even a routine where the lion gets drunk. So, so there's a lot that you can do with the lion, even though it is just a static costume most of the time. So when you see a lion dance performance, there's some basic elements that stay the same all the time, and then there's some that change. So one of the first elements that every lion dance has to have is the opening set of bows. And that just shows respect for the place that you're at. And if you're performing for a person, you bow to the person. If you're performing for like the grand opening of a restaurant, you would bow to the front door of the restaurant. You do 3 bows, and that signifies your respect for heaven, for earth, and for people. And there's always an element of getting the greens. The greens usually represented by a head of lettuce, and there's like a red envelope in there. The red envelope usually has the money for payment for the performance. But there's always the head of lettuce, because in Chinese it's called Cui Qing, which is searching for the greens. But that phrase can also mean, it's a homonym for stomping out the Qing dynasty. So there's a lot of hidden meanings within certain aspects of the Chinese performance. And there's greens on the ground, and sometimes there's greens hanging way up high. But the lion always takes the greens into its mouth, chews them up, and spits them out. And we can say that the greens, the lettuce, in Chinese is called sang chui, which is a homonym for expanding your business. And so it's a good luck thing, and the lion comes in, gets the fortune, and then is spreading the wealth when he spits the lettuce out. Or you can say that the lion is taking the Qing dynasty, eating it up, and throwing it out. See? So there's a lot of double meanings in the things that we do. And then the last element is always the closing bows, to again show respect for the place that you're at, and to kind of return the performance space to normal. But in between the opening bows and the getting of the greens, the Cui Qing ceremony, you can do a lot of different things. And one of the things that we say is that the lion always has to tell a story. You don't want to just watch the lion dance and like my professor friends, like, oh, you just go like this and jump around and you don't do anything. But there's a lot of meaning in the performance aspect of the art too. And so one of the stories that we tell is that the lion has to overcome a certain obstacle. What that represents is, for instance, if your business is facing any obstacles, the lion overcoming those obstacles represents your business overcoming whatever obstacles they're facing. And then the blessing will come after that, or because of that. And so one of the objects is the lion crossing the bridge, symbolizing your business crossing over into new territory, things like that. And the lion showing its skill, because they're supposed to be martial artists and have a lot of abilities. So they hang the greens down in the middle of the bridge, and the lion has to reach down and get them, find them first, and show its skill in getting them. Here's another example of a bridge made by a ladder, and you can see the lettuce is at the end of the ladder, so the lion would have to traverse that. There's religious stories, and so this particular example is the Chinese, the Bagua, the 8 trigrams, which is an element of Taoist and Buddhist philosophy. You have to know how to navigate each of the different elements and which one to go to first, which one to go to second, which ones to avoid, and things like that. And so there's a lot of knowledge that your group has to have in order to perform a lion dance properly. This particular one, you see the oranges. We use oranges sometimes as the food for the lion as well, because in Chinese, the word for orange is like a golden fruit, and so it symbolizes fortune. And the formation that these are in, there's actually, if you can see it, is the seven stars of the Big Dipper. In Chinese philosophy, the 7 stars of the Big Dipper are the gateway to heaven. So you traverse the 7 stars and then you can get into heaven, symbolizing the lion going there to retrieve the blessing or do its work and then come back down for the business. This is another 7-star formation. This is 7 stars surrounding the moon. And again, you would have to know which order to get those in and what to do with each element to do it properly. This is another 7-star performance. You can see the lion is standing on top of overturned bowls, and you have to have a lot of skill to do that without cracking the bowls, right? You don't want to break anything for the restaurant that you're performing at. That wouldn't be very good luck. Another thing that we do is animal formations, and so this is a crab. There's things that would oppose the lion, so represent, a lot of times it'll be like a snake or a scorpion that you see later on, or a crab, something that the lion has to battle and overcome. And you would use your martial arts movements to defeat the crab, eat it up and spit it out. Sometimes it's made by different elements. This one's made by different cans in a bucket. This one actually, when you flip over the shell of the big crab, it's got little crabs, live crabs, underneath, and you would have to go around and gather them up and return them to the host, kind of like returning the blessing to the host.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So if you're doing that, you have to open, whoever's the head of the line opens the mouth and actually has to grab the
Right.
crabs up,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and you have to be very careful when you're doing that because you don't want to get pinched yourself. So again, it shows your speed and your strength and your coordination and
And you're
your
not supposed to be
ability
showing
do
the
that.
audience that you're.
Right, yeah, you don't want to stick your hand out of the mouth and it just look weird. The aliens, right? So this is a centipede, which is one of the 5 poisonous creatures. There's in Chinese mythology, there's 5 poisonous creatures, and sometimes you'll see them represented on coins and things like that. If you overcome the 5 poisons, you're supposed to say that you have good health and good luck. And so the lion overcoming the 5 poisonous creatures is like wishing that blessing on the people. And this is a scorpion made out of oranges, but this is another scorpion, and it's actually made out of martial arts weapons. And what you would have to do with this one is, as you dismantle the different pieces, you would have to pass them to one of your teammates, and they would come out and they would have to perform with that weapon to show that you had the skill and strength and knowledge, and show how good your group was. And one of the more modern ways of performing is up on these poles that are like 8 to 10 feet tall, and the lion has to climb up onto these poles. On the top of each pole is a disc that's maybe 12 to 16 inches around, and you jump from pole to pole. What this represents is the lion climbing a mountain, and again showing its acrobatic skill and strength. We can say your business is rising to new heights. So you can see there's a lot of symbolism in the performance. So it's not just jumping around and doing things. But if a group really knows what they're doing, you should be able to follow along on the story and see what it's doing. Because the lion is seen as a messenger from heaven, we have what's known in religious philosophy as sacred time and sacred space. As a practicing Christian, we believe that the rituals that we do are not empty rituals, and likewise with the lion being a religious creature, the movements and things that we do also have meaning, right? They can transform the place that you're at. They can bring you from your normal, ordinary life into a sacred space, bless it, and then return it to be even better than it was before. The audience, we believe, is not a passive audience, just watching and not receiving, but the audience participates actively in the rituals, in the stories of the lion. Sometimes you'll see people holding up the red envelopes for the lion, and the lion will pause in their performance to come collect the red envelopes. If you feed the lion, you receive the blessing as well. Kind of the thought there. We also believe that the lion strengthens our sense of community through these shared stories and through elements that we're all participating in common. And we also believe that the lion strengthens our own personal sense of identity as we perform the same things that our ancestors have done for centuries and centuries, or as we understand the different elements, it brings us a stronger link with our past. And also as a religious creature, that it brings us to a sense of communion with the sacred being. And so that's basically, in a nutshell, a very quick skim through the lion dance. I can talk for hours and hours about this kind of stuff. You can ask my wife, I've done it before. I just wanted to give a quick overview, but do you have questions?
So many questions.
Yes.
I've gone to a lot of lion dances, and I don't remember the head of lettuce. If you're given a head of lettuce and you're in this costumed head,
Mm-hmm.
where does the lettuce go? You're to carry it around the rest of the time, so throw it back out?
Yeah, you actually do. You throw it back out. So the lion would gather it up in its mouth, go through the chewing motions, and as the lion's chewing, the performer is actually breaking it all up into smaller pieces, and then you throw it back out, spreading the wealth and spreading the blessing. A lot of restaurants don't like us to do that inside the restaurant too much anymore, and so if you've seen an indoor performance, they sometimes have a substitute for that. Sometimes it's like a plastic flower or something else. But traditionally that is a part of the performance.
How do you see?
How do you see? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Very careful. So when you've got the lion costume on, you can see that the mouth is actually one of the ways that we look out. There's holes through the nose as well. So when you're looking, when you're the tail, it's actually really hard to see because you basically are just following the head around. But if I come down and I need to see, I can look like that, or I can lift the head up, and the beard kind of hides my face, but at the same time I can take a look around and see where things are.
Does it get hot in there?
It does, yeah.
So if you're in the head position of the lion, is your costume then also covering your arms? Like if you know how, because if you lift your arms up and they're just bare, you know,
Right.
you see some of it's covered, but you would just see.
Yeah, usually when you have the tail on there, the tail drapes down over your arms, so you wouldn't be able to see them.
And it's not connected to the head, correct?
The tail is connected, yeah.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, I didn't bring a tail today,
Yeah,
but,
we have some of that in the library.
oh, yeah.
Oh, I just happen to have a line.
What are the other 5 poisonous creatures?
Okay, so it changes. but basically it'd be, sometimes there's a spider, a snake, a crab, a scorpion, and a toad. Sometimes it's a lizard, sometimes there's other things in there, but basically, if you see 5 creatures that are kind of dangerous represented together, it represents the 5.
Here's the tail.
Yeah.
There's the body, and the tail is over here, right?
That's the
tail's
collar.
This is the tail.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's the tail.
These are pants. Oh, the tail, yes,
Under the pants at the
is
back.
down on your side. It's like a cone of fur. There we go.
Yeah.
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
It's a 2-part question. One is, I know in the documentary they talk a little bit about the eye and ear movements.
Mhm.
Like, can you talk a little bit more about like what those signify and what they do with the dance? And then second, I recently saw a student group at UC Irvine do a lion dance, and I don't know if it's just because they didn't have money or training, but the eyes and the ears weren't mobile. So I'm wondering if that's one of the things that is also disappearing as the production gets more economical, or if the eyes and the ears aren't always as much of like a narrative focus. or-
Yeah, well, traditionally, you wanted to have the eyes and ears move. What we find is that when these eyes, for instance, these can rotate, back and forth. It knocks against the side and it breaks the framing of the bamboo.
Okay.
And so sometimes manufacturers make them so that they don't move. They should still blink though.
Right.
And what that is, if you can see in here, there's actually just a string that pulls and then elastic bands so that it springs back into place and you can move the eyes and ears.
Does it have some? I'm just thinking. I watch a lot of TV, and there's Fresh Off the Boat is a TV show, and
Yeah.
basically they had their Chinese New Year episode, and the
Right.
grandmother says she's very impressed by the eye work. She says great eye work when she sees the actual like lion dance happen. So-
Yeah, so when you're under the costume, especially the older traditional heads that are really heavy, you have to have one hand on the handle, and you have to be able to control the mouth, and you've only got 2 hands. So, controlling the eyes is like a next level kind of thing. So sometimes what we do is we'll just keep the string in our hand as we hold the handle, and then we can blink like this, or we'll rest it on our shoulders. But each performer will come up with their own way of doing that's comfortable for them. But yeah, that sometimes is the first thing to go because it is harder to coordinate. And then just doing that again is helping the emotions come out. So,
Like a puppeteer would with puppets, right?
Right.
It's the same concept.
yeah,
Because you tilt the head and blink the eye, and that could provoke
Exactly.
the emotion of something
Yeah.
that's more than if you
Right.
tilt the head and nothing else happens.
Yeah.
And it's like,
right. Yes. Go ahead.
So is part of the practice of being a martial artist, lion dancer, that you make your own lion head?
No, there's actually very few people that make lion heads. Every group, some of the martial arts masters are the ones that make lion heads as well. But a lot of them are just purchased from other places. So kind of yes and no. Yeah.
So there's sort of the people who perform and practice it, and then certain of those make them as well.
Yes.
Do the people that make them, are they always dancers?
Not always. It does help, and traditionally they would be, but then because China, likes to mass manufacture everything, we have lion factories in China that people do these on assembly lines, and they're not necessarily performers anymore. Yeah. Yes.
I'd like to ask about your personal life a little bit. Is your career somehow involved with this? You said Pepperdine, so are you a teacher? And are you also a martial artist? And how do you combine all of your activities?
Yeah.
Just 3 children.
Plus 3 children, yeah. I work for the IT department at Pepperdine, so I'm not a professor, but I do help out over there. And balancing lion dancing and career and everything else is it's tough to do. That's one of the reasons why I was talking to you before about if I still performed, and it's hard for me to do that because of family life and other commitments. It's something that I would like to get into again, but when I have time. Yeah, I did learn from a group that traditionally all lion dance groups were martial arts groups. But then as certain groups just started to, we really like to do the lion dance, and less people were qualified to teach the martial arts aspect, that's kind of falling by the wayside. So there's more and more groups now that only do lion dancing, not martial arts.
But you had said from past history when the Chinese government told the people they couldn't wear certain things or do certain things,
Right.
so martial arts was being, cut away, so the way for them to continue their training in
yeah.
Kung Fu or any kind of martial arts is to incorporate the lion
Right.
dance, so that was
Yeah.
considered more of an art thing than a martial arts practice, right?
Exactly,
So
yeah, but
it's
they
kinda
were
on
still
the
secretly
slide.
martial
Yeah,
artists,
okay.
yeah.
In other words, there were postures that came from the martial arts that they translated into the
Yes.
dance.
Yeah, so the different movements of the lion, if I do the movements without the lion on, you can see. So the basic stance is called the horse stance, and this is a Kung Fu stance where you're very balanced. And some of the arm movements, like for instance, if I took the head and I wanted to look this way, this is also what's called the cat stance in martial arts. But if I didn't have the head on, that would be like a block, right? So it's the same type of movements, just under the costume.
I just kind of ripping off of Carol's question. I'm wondering where most people are being trained now, since you talked about different ways that people are economizing or trying to keep up with the tradition. Is it coming out of martial arts studios or Chinese American cultural centers where young kids are taking classes? Like, how are youth being exposed and trained in
Lots
this
of different
process?
ways, yeah. So a lot of the martial arts schools still have a lion dance aspect to them. Those are the ones that are performing a lot of the traditional puzzles still, because they have the skill to do that. They have the knowledge of that aspect of it. Cultural centers are another way. There are groups that are going into like Chinese schools and saying, can we teach for half an hour after the lessons and things like that. And then there's also groups who form after watching YouTube videos and going, hey, that's really cool, let's buy a lion dance costume and we can imitate the movements and do that. But what those are lacking are the stories and the tradition and the history behind that. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that this is passed on.
Are you teaching your kids?
Am I teaching my kids? That's a great question. Little by little. They're not in any formal training program. They have interests in other areas of life. But maybe sometimes they would be interested. And I am building them lions. As soon as I heard my wife was pregnant, each time I started building a lion. The only one I've finished is for my oldest son, and the other two are still works in progress. So, again, because of timing and life issues and things, but yeah.
Chris, I think you have a question over here.
Yeah.
I've seen you mention videos, and I was researching a project and happened to find these amazing videos of lion dancers doing the tall pole,
Mhm.
and just like really, like a whole stadium of people watching them doing these incredibly intricate tall pole,
Yeah.
jumping around, and it was breathtaking. But that my impression of that event was that it was a competition.
Mhm.
Are there line dance competitions?
Yeah, there are, especially in Asia where there's a lot more groups. They do have competitions, just like we have dance competitions or martial arts competitions or other things. There are lion dance competitions too. There are certain groups who have tried to bring that to the United States as well, especially in San Francisco and a couple of other places, but the interest from the general population really isn't there to sustain them. So they've been kind of spotty, you know, one or two here or there, and then not an annual thing. But in Asia, they are sponsored by cities or sponsored by, you know, major corporations, and they can have competitions every year. Yeah. Yes.
Is there a significance or symbolism to the coloring of the lions? Because I noticed that some more yellow, more green. That one that you have on the screen is black and white.
Right.
The red, you know, which is.
Yeah. Yeah, so the original lions, like I mentioned before, were supposed to represent those three generals. And all of the generals had their own coloring, especially in the Cantonese opera, so that you can see, you know, and recognize the character right away. And so the lions followed the coloring of the character that they were portraying. Nowadays, we're finding that groups are not into the tradition and knowing that history so much. And so they just kind of order lions that they like. They think, oh, this color would be good or whatever. But they still try to follow the traditional Chinese color theory, you know, where red is a happy color, gold represents fortune, green represents newness and growth and freshness, that type of thing. So yeah, the symbol on the lion, even the patterns that are painted have meaning.
Is the story of the three generals a true story? And when you talked about the history and the emperor who had the dream about the lion and basically the origins of these, how far back did that go?
Well, that it's one of those things where it's the stuff of legend. We call them kind of historical dramas. So there is an element of truth. There were generals. China was united at one point in time. Whether or not the events happened the same way that it's told about in the novel, you know, it's kind of up for interpretation. Yeah.
So it could be true.
Yeah.
Anyway, is this 5,000 years? More than 5,000 years?
Probably about 2,000 to 3,000 years. So yeah. Yes.
I got a two-parter.
Okay.
You mentioned before about how there's, you know, what's going to happen ahead of time with the bowing and all that stuff, sort of, I guess, tradition. But how much of the dance is rehearsed beforehand, and how much of it is improvised? And then the second part of my question is, what's the worst thing that could happen? Or you have like a story like cramping or grabbing a scorpion or
Yeah. Okay.
crazy things happen.
The lion split.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a two-part thing, because some of the things that we do are choreographed, especially the routines, like you said, in the competitions. You kind of have to practice those, especially if you're going to go up on those poles, and
Right.
you got to know what you're doing. So they really go through their routines a lot. Other things, like for instance, some of those the puzzles that we saw in there, crossing the bridge and things like that. Lion dance troops used to go through Chinatown or go through a village or whatever, bringing the blessing in. If you wanted the lion to perform for your shop, you just kind of set out something for it to do. And so the group had to have that knowledge of, you know, oh, I encountered this thing, I know what to do with it. You know, they set up the 7 stars, I know which star to take. They set up, you know, for instance, the ladder as a bridge. You have to know, oh, I got to cross it, and you got to figure those things out. So that's not going on so much anymore. But there are restaurants where we'll go to ahead of time and say, you know, what type of performance would you like? And, you know, we can set up this certain puzzle with this certain meaning, you know. And those types of things you have to rehearse. Now, what's the worst thing that can happen? There's things, well, with the poles, there's obviously people that fall off the poles, and yeah, that it gets pretty dangerous. There have been people who have had to have the ambulance come and cart them away. The worst thing that's happened to me, I probably haven't had really bad stories. It's things like when you're going to get the lettuce, for instance, if they hang it from the balcony or something like that, you can't reach it, or when you reach up and grab it, the string doesn't break and the lettuce is still up there and you look like a fool. But there's times when it's stacked up, it's higher than you can jump, and so you have to stack on top of another person's shoulders and you slip and you fall off and things like that. So yeah, there's danger involved. Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, just, what are the pom-poms, are they wool?
Traditionally, they're silk. I'm not sure what type of silk exactly, because usually you think of silk as really soft and smooth. These are actually kind of spiky. So the pom-pom makers are very closed craftsmen, and so there's very few people that know how to do that, and very few places where we can get those pom-poms. So when we build lions or rebuild them, we have to order those special from China, and there's very few sources for them.
And do you specify the colors that
You
you
can,
want?
yeah. They do have stock ones that they're building all the time. They're standard colors, for instance, just the black and white, or ones to match different colors. For my lions, I do specify them, what colors I want, because I want it to match the color scheme of the lion. So, yeah.
How much does a lion cost?
There's a whole range, because like I mentioned, the factories in China, they can slam out a lion in a couple of days,
As
a
beautiful
week.
as that?
No. At least I don't think so. So like this lion, they're building these all the time. If you go to shops in Chinatown, you'll see lions that look exactly, well, not exactly, newer than this, but the same color scheme. The pom-pom makers already know we're gonna make 10,000 of these pom-poms and put them on 100 lions. So these lions you can get fairly inexpensively for lions. Something from a factory in China for a full-size head you can probably get for about I would say $400 to $500. But something like this, where it's custom designed and it's a lot more elaborate, it can run up to $2,000, $3,000.
And then there's shipping.
Yeah, shipping's on top of that. Yes.
Beautiful.
Is this considered like the normal size?
This is
that's like
actually
a
a
mini
little
one or
bit
smaller?
large. Traditionally,
Is this like is that the size of what this one is?
yeah, these two are about the same size. These are called size 2 lions. So Chinese sizing goes backwards from what you would think. So a size 1 lion is the largest. This is about a size 4 or 5 lion. We don't use this size anymore because it's too heavy. Especially for jumping on the poles. You don't want something that weighs, 30 pounds on you when you're jumping from pole to pole. So something a little bit smaller, a size 3 is usually the standard now.
I have one last question.
Sure.
You talked a little bit about the lion dance in relationship to Chinese opera, and I know historically Chinese opera was a male-only sphere. So I'm wondering if that was the same thing with the lion dance, and if, obviously I've seen women do lion dances before, so maybe it shifted, but is there like a gendered history too?
There is. China is known as a very patriarchal country, especially in the martial arts realm. Women weren't supposed to practice martial arts, they weren't supposed to go into the opera like you mentioned, so it was all male. When I joined my first troupe in early 80s, it was still just starting to be integrated, and that's like, 30 years ago. So some of those traditions have carried over, but there are troops in New York and in Asia that are only women now. So yeah, that is shifting. Other questions? Yeah? Yes. Oh yeah, you asked about what's the worst thing that happened. When I was a little kid, I talked about the apartment that we had in Chinatown overlooking the street and hearing the lion dance and running to the window to see the performance. My mom would keep the iron on the windowsill to cool down. And so one time when I climbed up there, I smacked it with my arm and the iron did burn me. And yeah, it wasn't a good situation, but you know.
More as a fan.
Yeah. I was more upset that I missed the lion dance.